Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Fox and Burger podcast. I'm your co-host, Fox.
And I am Burger.
And today we're going to yet another place that we've never been before, China. Joining us today is Simone, a Fox from China. He's been in the fandom since 2017 and has served as a staff member for SFF, that's Super Furry Fusion, in Shanghai. We're so honored to have him as our first Chinese fur, so let's give him a big awoo.
Hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me here. I am Simone.
Yes, welcome Simone to the podcast. It has been a while. I have not seen you since, like, the last Super Furry Fusion maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, I guess that.
Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all. Introduce yourself to the audience first by telling us about your fursona.
Okay, so my persona is basically a fox, and it just looks like a regular fox you can think of. That's basically because I decided to make a fursuit by my own because buying a fursuit is so expensive. And I don't know how good I can make the suit, so I didn't have a detailed ref sheet until I finished the fursuit head. So I draw the ref sheet based on the head. I guess that's a rare way to do it. So that's basically a very natural-like fox.
It's always nice to have a fox on the show, a fellow fox, 狐狸哥。
That's so true.
好像狐狸族会在这个授权很普遍吧，或者是很热门。Seems very popular to have a fox as a persona even in China, I guess.
I guess, but I heard that based on a survey in Taiwan, fox are not the most popular species in Asia, especially in the females. I guess that's because of our culture.
Yeah,
but
that is
still
true.
is growing. The popularity of Asia fox is still growing, and I like it.
So we had a follow-up question on that. How did you become a furry then?
I guess for most of the furries, they become a furry by a piece of media, like a movie, a book, and cartoon. And for me, that is Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Oh.
So long before I know the furry fandom, yeah.
Yeah, are you
heard
talking
about that?
Are you talking about like the early like TV series?
No. I started following it from a CGI movie and then dig into the TV series.
Oh, are you talking about the 2003 Alvin and Chipmunks or
2003? No. It's more like
2007.
2007.
2007?
Yeah.
Okay.
7. I guess it's 2007.
Right.
Then 2011, 2013, and then I found there was a 60 years of history of Alvin and Chipmunks and fell in love with it. And in the Alvin and Chipmunks fandom, I learned there is a furry fandom, but I didn't care much until I'm into college and have more time to myself.
Sure.
And then Zootopia came.
Wow.
Then everyone becomes a furry.
Yeah, Zootopia. Oh yeah, for sure. Like that was a really big like landmark movie for the I guess the fandom. And interestingly enough, I feel like our audience may or may not know this, but if I'm not mistaken, depending on which country you lived in, the reporter for Zootopia, like in one of the reporting scenes, the animal actually changes based on the country you lived in. So I think in China, like the reporter was like a panda, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's a panda.
Like in Canada, wasn't it a moose?
I think I remember something like that. I don't remember if they actually got the voice actors for the news reporters to be like actual news reporters to be in that role from those countries as well. I think I remember that part of it too.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know about that. So moving on to our next section, we talked a little bit briefly before the podcast, and you mentioned you did a lot of like translation work. Could you possibly tell us a little bit more about that kind of translation work, like what you worked on?
Yeah, so at the start, the only thing I do is cross-post the videos from YouTube to a Chinese-based website called Bilibili, because most of the Chinese audience, they don't have access to YouTube.
Right.
So I ask those furry YouTubers, can I post your video to this Chinese website so they can see your amazing content? And many of them said yes. So I started to cross-post these things. And later on, I just realized there's another barrier beyond this internet barrier.
Right.
That's the language barrier. Since we know the furry fandom is basically a very young fandom. And that means they may not have enough education to listen to maybe 5 minutes of fast English videos. So I started to do some translation for those videos I posted before I realized I don't have enough energy to do all of this. So I gathered a group of furries and started this translating group called Furrontier. And started to translate more and more videos and things like Bitter Lake, the movie. Then we move on to some visual novel like Repeat, also the documentary series by Ash Coyote. And later on, I started to translate the web comic, the House Pets, starting from 2020 because I was in the pandemic, have nothing to do, can't go to school. There gotta be something I can do every day, and my teacher gave us a challenge. You should do something on a daily basis for 30 days. I was like, okay, let's try to translate House Pass. And haven't been stopped because I haven't catch up with the author.
So that's kind of interesting. I just want to go back to what you mentioned when you said that you were taking, like you're asking the content creators for permission to re-upload those videos from YouTube to Bilibili.
Yes.
I've used Bilibili on occasion. I don't normally go to it, but I know what it is. I kind of find it interesting because like not only did you have to get across the internet barrier, obviously, but then you had to also translate because like most of the content that I guess furries produce is going to be in English, right? I would imagine that most of the content that is produced not only is in English, but it also seems to be coming from the Western world, so the US and Europe. So did you say that like you started this group to basically like translate this sort of like English material into Chinese? So like for example, have you translated like Majira's videos in the past or?
Yes. A lot of my cross-posted videos are from Majira. Actually,
okay.
I just asked the permission of, let's say, Myron, North Hyena, Majira, Easy Wolf. I guess that's all. So we just focus on this because they can put out new videos on, I guess, weekly basis.
Absolutely. But I had a final question about translation back to Simone about what he does for the fandom, and then I'd like to go on to SFF. What were some concepts or things that you saw in translating those like furry videos from, let's say, like Majira or whatever, whoever you're translating into Chinese? Like, is there like a concept? Is there like a word? Are there like any phrases that you found difficult? We talked a little bit about this with Carbon, like the word like otherkin, for example. Like that's a word that like there's no Chinese equivalent. So like I was just curious, like if you had any like insight to any difficulties in translating.
Okay, so talking about a word that is extremely difficult to translate into Chinese, the first thing come to my mind is actually furry.
Oh, right.
Yes, in Chinese, people tend to, the word furries represents usually two kind of thing. One is the furry characters, those animals. The other is the furry fans, those humans. And for those animals, people usually call them 兽人, and translate it back to English word by word as beast man. And that translation is already used by the orcs.
Right.
So they already have a strange connection. And for those furry fans, people tend to use like 兽迷, 受控, 受人控, a lot of words to describe it.
对。
I don't think they are quite accurate. And the word 兽, which is beast, or in English kimono, whatever it is just lack of that fluffiness of furry. So and just later this month, another word trend in the fandom is called Furry. That's actually a transliterate. And in a way to use some of the best word with that a like sound to translate this thing, just like how people translate the name of the countries. And there's a lot of memes.
是音译，他们用音译这个方式来翻译吗？
对。
哦，你可以给我写这个，那你刚才说的是福瑞吗？还是飞瑞？ 可以给我打字吗？
福气的福，祥瑞的瑞。
Okay. So I was just asking him to like show the characters, so we can probably flash those characters on the screen and show the pinyin. Because I'll just ask him like, oh, it's a transliteration of the word furry instead of using the words show me or something like mao mao. Anyway, continue, please.
Yes. It all started with some meme. First used to target at the furries. Says, okay, furries are terrible, and something in those memes, the furries are referred as furry. But actually, the character fu and ri quite positive words in the Chinese language, and I found that word is actually better than any other translation. So I'm considering translating this thing into furry, and before that, in the videos, I just tend to keep it English. And it's just a single word, and people can learn it. I guess that makes no difference.
Oh, so you did what I guess we would call in translation a zero translation. 你只是直接用英文吗？
Yes, a zero translation.
Oh, okay. So you just literally wrote the English word using English letters like F-U-R-Y or something like that. You would just say furry. You wouldn't write that in Chinese. But then now you're saying that like this foray, this like word that you saw from a meme, right? You saw this word in a meme and the characters have like a really good meaning to them. So you would like to use that to translate the word furry instead of saying something like show me or something like that. You like to use that word.
Yeah, I'm definitely considering that.
Oh, okay.
All right. Yeah, I mean, when I was first talking to the furry fandom over in China, I should mention that my first job teaching English overseas was in mainland China. And I was still involved with the furry fandom at that time, so I was trying to do my best to communicate with the furries that lived in mainland China, and shoumi was the word that they were still using. Even though it translated weirdly in Google Translate, that was just what I was used to.
Of course.
Until I got here to Taiwan, I think, people were using Mao Mao more often.
Well, Mao Mao, that doesn't mean furry. That's more like fursuiter or fursuit.
Right. Yeah, it also just literally means furry or hairy.
It actually fur.
You have the tendency to mean fursuiter, but sometimes it's also used in the non-suitors, but less.
Fursuits and videos aren't just that; those aren't the only parts of the furry fandom or any community. They also have the gatherings and conventions. So let's move on to talking about Super Furry Fusion. Can you give us a brief explanation of what that event is?
Okay, so Super Furry Fusion is a furry convention started in, I guess, 2018 and have been going through 2019 and 2020. It happens in Shanghai every end of July, maybe the start of August during the summer vacation, so most of the students can attend it.
And I just want to ask, is it because I don't know very much about the Chinese furry fandom, is that the very first furry convention in China?
No.
Or has there been others?
Actually, the first furry convention might started in 2015.
Oh.
And there's another convention in 2017. One of them were in an underground mall, another in a hotel. I haven't attended them. I guess they are in Guangzhou.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah. So what was your role at SFF?
Initially, I don't have any role in SFF, and then in the 2020 SFF, because of the COVID-19, everyone is cautious, and there were a chat group full of medical background furries. They may be medical students, or they may be regular people with some first aid certification. And then the host would come to us and ask, okay, we need a medical team for our con. At least this year we really need it.
Right.
Can you do it? And they asked me, am I going to join it? I asked, okay, I'm only an electronic engineering student. I don't have a medical background, but I do have a first aid certification. So if you have any better choice, don't choose me. And they said, no, we don't have any better choice. So I joined them. It was a 8-people group and divided into 4 subgroups. Through group taking turns to take temperature of the attendees. And I'm in the first aid group, sitting at a first aid desk, handling emergency things like heat stroke and burning by the glue gun, things like those.
Wow, I think this is the first time we've had someone with any sort of first aid or medical training like that on the podcast, especially one that has done that for a convention.
Yeah, I believe, shout out to Alder. Alder is actually a doctor, by the way, so I think he has, actual, medical training more in terms of being a doctor at a hospital, but I don't think Alder has ever served as a first aid / medic at a convention, so that's kind of interesting.
Right. Yeah. Was it at all stressful or eventful as part of the medical staff?
It can be stressful when there are issues that we need to solve, but for most of the time we just sit behind the desk and the two of us takes turns to go around the convention center and take temperatures from random people. And sometimes there are emergencies, like we've handled a heat stroke. Fursuiter passed out in the fursuit, and somebody come up to us and say, hey, there's a fursuit passing out and we need you. So the first thing we do is to grab some chairs and rush to the spot. And we found there was no fursuiter, so people are confused and we starting to look around. And then we found him in the headless lounge. He managed to crawl into the headless lounge by himself. And then we take it over from there, and we have cooling pads, water, salt, things.
Wow, that's very interesting. It's like you almost made it. It's just you passed out before you could actually get some fresh air. That's
yeah.
But it's a good thing that you had a medical staff there to help people out. I think that's always one of the more important parts of a convention.
Yeah, definitely.
I had a question just for clarification. So was that in are you talking about 2020 you guys had a con, or?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Wow.
During 2020, late July. Actually, there were at least 4 cons going on here in 2020.
Oh, I see. So it was safe.
Wow.
It was safe enough that you guys were able to hold a con.
I'm already hearing the cries of the American and European furries listening to this.
Yeah.
Come on, keep on the vaccination.
Actually, I've on a similar note, Denver, the convention in Denver, Colorado, is requiring vaccination certificates for convention goers for their upcoming 2021 convention.
That's a good news. I hope they do the same for the Chinese 2020 con, whichever con they are. They need to check the certification of vaccination, I hope.
Exactly. And I should mention that I have been to one of the Super Furry Fusion conventions. It was back in 2019. And at that point, it was only a one-day convention, unless that's changed.
Super Furry Fusion have been a one-day convention, 3 times, but they also have this winter event called Winter Furry Fusion, I guess, and that's a 1 weekend event held in a hotel, a very large one. And last year they managed to book almost all of that hotel and opened all of its meeting rooms and started to sell the rooms bonded with the convention tickets. So that's what we call a real convention, I hope.
Yeah, the last time I went to a convention in China, the Super Furry Fusion was just packed. Like, you had the first floor with like a registration area, and then you went up to the third floor, and it was just, the entire third floor was just taken up by the convention. You had the main event area and dealer's den area that was all in the same room, which is why it was so crowded. And then you had some artist alleys along the hallways, and then you also had a photo shoot area as well.
Yes, and we are so tired of that old convention center, and I heard they are going to move on to a larger convention center this year.
Right, that's good.
That's a good.
Just for the audience sake, could you guys, or do you guys know about like the attendee count though, like over the years? Like, I don't know if we can maybe find the information later, but like I don't know, do you guys have an idea about like what kind of numbers we're looking at for SFF?
The year that I went, it was in the 4 digits, like at least
like 2K,
1,500 to 2,000.
Oh, okay, quite large.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they seldom put out the total number of their ticket accounts, but I guess we can show some of the fursuit photos through the years. You can see how much they evolved.
What opinions do mainland Chinese furries have about other fandoms, like in the West or in Asian countries?
I don't know quite about that. Even though I do the cross-post thing, I just post their contents here in China, but for them they can only view the contents, but they have little experience with the actual foreign furry communities. So only those like the international students, they may have been to America or some place and attend their con, be in their community. Most of the Chinese furry, I think they may not have a clear image of what the furry community in other countries is like. And from what I heard from those international students, they are like, okay, I've been in a whole new country. I'm foreign here, and the furry fandom is the first thing I come to. And they are who give me the help. And they are even better than the local Chinese international student group. The local furry group is always more helpful.
Yeah, I suppose things just not limited to language barriers sometimes, you know? It's just, some things just come together. Maybe here's something you might have a bit more information on. How do most furries in China communicate with each other? Like, what do they use to communicate with each other? What apps, what websites, and all that?
Nowadays, most of the furries in China, they communicate via QQ. It's something like Telegram, but not Telegram. It's a communication app with a timeline like a Twitter. But yes, that's what it is. But on Twitter, you can follow other people and see their contents. But on QQ, you can only add them to your friends. You have to become mutuals to see their timeline. And before that, there was Baidu Tieba, something like a BBS. It has a lot of sub BBS, and one of them is about furries. That was during, let me see, the 2005 through 2020, I guess. After 2012, the Tieba just dies due to bad management, I guess. So people flood out of Tieba and started to use QQ more, and maybe Weibo and microblog. But I don't use it. For me, I found those furry in QQ most generally. And for those content sharing, they just go for those specific websites like Bilibili or Zhihu, that's the Chinese furry of Quora. for sharing their contents, and for communication, that's only QQ.
What about Weixin, WeChat for communication?
For most of the young people in China, Weixin
太老了吗？
is like only for families and works, not for friends.
算是有一点老牌吗？ A little bit old fashioned.
Yes, even though WeChat is newer than QQ, but people tend to keep their fan group on QQ and keep their work on WeChat.
QQ, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what about like internationally then? I think you kind of touched upon this, but like if a Chinese fur were to want to contact these like I'll use the word foreign, like these foreign furries, so basically furries that aren't in China, like I'm guessing, like, do they use Telegram, like what do they use?
I guess the foreign quote unquote furries are usually on Twitter. Most of them on Twitter, so I guess if a Chinese furry want to get connected to them, the first thing they do is to follow their Twitter account, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I really noticed that, yeah, like when I go to, or when I'm just browsing Twitter, I noticed that on the bio it says that they're from China, perhaps, and then like maybe it's like I would even say that sometimes there are some famous, well, I wouldn't say famous, but I'd say like some popular Chinese furry artists who post their art on Twitter, and they get a lot of likes, actually. I find that very interesting. But I'm assuming that you have to use, do you have to use a VPN to access Twitter in China? Isn't that right?
Yes, we have to use VPN to access Twitter. And for those artists, I want to say, selling commissions to maybe an US furry or a European furry can make a lot of money than selling those arts in China.
Oh, yeah.
They usually have different price tags, so for the Chinese people, it's already cheaper, and for the European and the American furries, it's usually a higher price, and part of it is to compensate the fee to use PayPal. A part of it is because they need a press strategy.
I want to ask a question going back to the Chinese furry fandom. Basically, I'm really curious about how do the general public of China, just like the average Chinese person, what do they think about furry? Do they think it's like an extension of anime or ACG? Do they think it's something entirely different? Like, do you have any insight to that?
Generally speaking, I guess they have little knowledge of what furry really like. When we need to explain it to other people, so maybe when we are fursuiting and people comes around, when those people are maybe elderly people, those who have little experience, little knowledge of what ACG or anime is, we'll just say, okay, this is something like anime, this is something like cosplaying, and they'll understand. But when it comes to those who have some knowledge of ACG or anime, they're going to come up and ask, okay, what are these characters? What content are these from? Can you show me how to see those animes? That's the hard part. We need to just try to explain how these are original characters and why there are so many original characters showing here, why we are here. Still, we don't have a universal way to answer that. We have to improvise. I guess we get that a lot in the Comic-Con. And another comment we have in Comic-Con, usually in winter, is like how warm they are. You know, those regular cosplayers, their costume barely cover their skin, and we are so warm.
所以我就是很好奇，他们以为过你们是吉祥物吗？ Did they ever think you're a mascot?
No, because mascot is not a very big culture in China. Most of the sports team, they don't really have a mascot. Usually they know mascot for those people dressed up as animals handing out those advertisements in front of the mall. And they can clearly see that the fursuit have a better quality than those things, so they're kind of confused. So the only thing they can think of is maybe that's cosplay. And sometimes they may think that's a cosplay from some cartoon, and clearly we are not. So yes, there are experiences when they mistake one of the bear character into a bear character in a Chinese cartoon.
I think on a similar but bizarre note, I think I remember at Super Furry Fusion, there was a booth advertising like Vanguard Buddy Fight or whatever, and they had their own mascot character dress up, and people got photos of that too, along with the fursuiters, and it was like, that was just a weird thing.
I really want to watch Buddy Fight. I'm not. I watched a few episodes, but I don't think it's my thing. But that's kind of interesting.
And also, like, I have a funny story related to this, but I'll let you talk about this first. What is it like fursuiting in public areas? Do you usually need some sort of license, or what do you need to do to have that be allowed and not like get kicked out by security?
I guess, do I need a lesson? That usually depends on how crowded that place it is. Burger, you had an experience fursuiting in Lujiazui.
Yeah.
Right, that's the center of Shanghai. That was a really crowded place, and the security asked us to take off the mask, take off the hat. Yes, China is so crowded, and if you just fursuit in the crowd, those security are going to worry about you. You're going to attract a lot of people and jam the traffic. So Lujiazui and the Bound are the places where fursuiters are usually not allowed. But in some less crowded place like the Northern Bound, we sometimes fursuit in that place. For some enclosure place like the zoo, we actually had an experience when fursuiting in the zoo. Before that, we did contacted maybe the commercial department of the zoo and got their permission. But when we got to the zoo, the security stopped us. They see a bunch of people holding large suitcase coming through, and then we realized that the commercial department didn't told the security department of this event, and the commercial department was off duty in weekends. So we were held in front of the gate for an hour, and we made a lot of phone call and talked about them. So clearing things up, and after an hour they let me in, and they were nice enough to lend us a land in the staff only area for us to change our fursuit. And the rest of the afternoon we just started the fursuit parade around the zoo, taking photos with the animals. That was kind of fun when we can actually fursuit in the zoo.
That's amazing that they actually let you in, even though there was some miscommunication there. The one time I got in a little bit of a trouble fursuiting in mainland China was I was by myself. I went to like this, it was a shopping area, but also connected to like a gardens, because in Suzhou, there's just gardens everywhere. There's about as many gardens as there are like rivers. So one of the gardens that was connected to like the shopping area,
Yes.
I put on my fursuit. I get pictures with people. People are like gathering around me for photos and such. No hint at all that I'm like a foreigner, because this was one of my fursuits where almost all of my skin was basically not shown. Like I had arm sleeves and hand paws and feet and a head to cover like almost everything. And then one of the police officers comes by speaking Chinese to me, and it was a little bit difficult to communicate with this person because at this point my Chinese was not that good. So eventually I took my head off. They realize I'm a foreigner, but they're still speaking Chinese to me, probably because they don't know any English. And I was basically just told, you know, get away. I was kicked out to McDonald's.
Were you hungry?
I was.
Did they think you were hungry? Wow.
McDonald's. That's where a burger belongs.
Sure.
I mean, it's kind of nice that you didn't get like, quote unquote, like detained or arrested. They just like, shoot you off to a different place.
That's kind of like a privilege you have when you're a white foreigner in certain Asian countries. They just kind of treat you like you don't know better,
Yes.
even if you do.
Yeah. Foreigner card.
Kind of.
So I got let off easy with that. So outside of just going to the zoo, how often do furries in China actually go out and fursuit and gather and stuff outside of conventions?
As I remember, during the good old days before the COVID, maybe that's twice a month in Shanghai, I guess. Usually in the park, in those with a lot of greenland. Sometimes we fursuit by the river. Once we even fursuited in my school. And nowadays there's something like a furry salon or furry bar in Shanghai where they held weekly events every weekend, so you can sign up for it online and take your fursuit to their place, and they will provide you with snack and beverage, and you can take photos and fursuiting in that place. So I guess they have these events every weekend.
Is that a place where it's like furries rented out, like a bar that furries rented out, or like is the bar owner furry himself?
It's owned by a furry, and there's a two-story little place. The first story was partly used as their comic workshop. They make furry comics, and the rest of it is usually the beverage and resting area, photo taking areas, things like that.
That's really cool.
All right, I'm booking my flights. Do you want to join me, Michael? Or do you want to go to China?
Yeah.
You want to go to Shanghai?
Yeah, sure. I think I need a visa though, right? I think Americans need visas.
Well, we can talk about that later.
Sure. Yeah, because like I think in Taiwan there was really only one place that I know of that the quote unquote like it's like a cafe. It's owned. It's like the Fat Tail Cafe. I'll try to share a picture if I can find a picture and flash it on the screen. But it's like a cafe owned by a furry, I think, and they did a lot of breakfast items. But I think they closed. So yeah. So I think that's really cool. What you guys have in Shanghai.
There's also that one place in the southern part of the island where it's like a tea or drink spot, but they hand you the drinks via a furry hand through a hole in the wall.
Oh yeah, I saw that on Saudi's Facebook. I didn't know what that was. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we'll show a picture or video of it, but like that's something to research.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard there's a place like this in mainland China too, and I heard one of the bear fursuiters just went there, and yes, that hole will stick out a brown furry hand and handle the beverage. I heard that's because the stuff behind that paw is disabled, and through this way he can communicate with you without actually letting you know what kind of disability they have. So that bear fursuiter went to that place and ordered a drink in the fursuit and taken the beverage from the furry hand with his own furry paw. That was kind of thin.
So I had one final question. This has to deal with traveling outside of China. I know for Infinity, if you guys didn't know this, they actually do publish where the attendee is from, and I think you can tell them if you don't want to do that, they obviously won't write that in. But it's kind of interesting to see the sort of like different nations and the different like nationalities that come to Taiwan to attend Infinity. And I do remember seeing a few Chinese furries, like maybe 5 or 6. But given the massive population of China, and I know that there are more Chinese furries out there, do Chinese furries just do they not travel outside of China, or afraid of the language barrier? Or I was just curious if you knew anything about that.
Okay, so speaking of traveling outside of China and attending other conventions, I guess the first barrier is not the language barrier. I guess the first barrier is actually the expense.
Right.
The international flight, the hotels, food, everything outside of China, like in the US, in Europe, in Japan, is usually more expensive than those in China. And those places where stuff are less expensive than China, they usually don't have a lot of furries.
Oh.
I guess. So I guess that's the first barrier. And most of the furries in China, they are quite young and they don't have incomes. They may think twice when they go to SFF. They need to book the bullet train. They need to book a hotel in Shanghai, which is one of the most expensive city in China. And they don't dare consider going abroad for a furry convention. And for those who do have that much money, those rich people, time is luxury. And for Chinese go to most of the countries around the world, they need a visa. Signing a visa takes a lot of time. So only those who have both the money and the time can do those international traveling. Or those international students. Maybe they study in Europe, they study in the US, so they attend the local con.
Right.
That's what I see.
Mm-hmm. We do know some Taiwanese furries who are in the U.S. right now, and hopefully to have them on the show. For example, we have Sakura Inu and Aina, who are Taiwanese furries in America. And what's kind of interesting is that I got to meet both of them in America before COVID happened, and so I would imagine that if you're like a Chinese foreign student studying abroad, I think that would be a really cool opportunity to attend those cons. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. But I think now that's about it for this podcast. Thank you so much once again, Simone, for coming to this podcast. Before you go, can you give us your social media details, any way that people can interact with you on the internet?
Okay, so my Twitter handle is at crazy_Simone_. Do I need to spell it? I guess I don't. And you can also find me on YouTube. Maybe it's still crazy_Simone. I have maybe 3 or 4 videos there you can check out.
Awesome.
All right. Well, this has been the Fox and Burger podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening so far. This has been Burger.
And I'm Fox.
And we'll see you again in the next episode. Bye-bye.